The only real difference between him and Basil is that he was small and had a very large henpecking wife.
Brilliant, chaotic, unforgettable. Fawlty Towers remains a crown jewel of British comedy, a show that dared to be louder and funnier than anything before it. But sometimes daring goes too far, and in the middle of all the madness, one scene crossed a line the world wasn't ready for. What was so shocking about that scene that it silenced Fawlty Towers? The real hotel disaster that inspired Basil. When people think about Fawlty Towers, they often picture John Cleese as the unforgettable Basil Fawlty, running around the hotel in pure chaos. But what many fans do not know is that Basil's character was actually based on a real hotel owner, and his story is just as wild as the show itself. In 1970, the Monty Python team traveled to Torquay, a seaside town in England, while they were filming. They booked rooms at the Glen Eagles Hotel, thinking it would be just another quiet place to stay. Instead, it turned into an unforgettable experience, and not for the best reasons. The hotel was run by a man named Donald Sinclair, and he quickly made an impression. Sinclair had a sharp tongue, little patience, and a habit of treating guests in a way that felt more insulting than welcoming. John Cleese later said Sinclair was the rudest man I've ever come across in my life. That says a lot, considering Cleese had met plenty of characters in the comedy world. So what exactly did Sinclair do? For one, he scolded Terry Gilliam for using the wrong cutlery. He also moved Eric Idle's suitcase because he thought it looked suspicious, as if it might contain a bomb. And when Cleese's wife Barbara casually asked for a sandwich, Sinclair made it sound like she was asking for something outrageous. Imagine paying to stay at a hotel and being treated as though you were a nuisance just for wanting to eat. While most of the Monty Python team packed up and left for another hotel, Cleese stayed because he was fascinated. To him, Sinclair was comedy gold. Here was a man who seemed almost too over the top to be real, yet everything he did was genuine. Cleese began taking mental notes, watching how Sinclair barked at guests, fussed over small things, and made everyone uncomfortable. Those notes would eventually turn into Basil Fawlty, one of television's most iconic characters. John Cleese, before Basil. Before Basil Fawlty ever existed, John Cleese was already making people laugh, though not in a hotel lobby. His story started far from TV studios in Weston-super-Mare, where he was born in 1939. As a kid, Cleese was extremely tall for his age. Other children teased him, and he often felt out of place. Instead of getting angry, he learned to use humor as a way out. If he could make people laugh, the teasing lost its sting. He used that trick so much that it eventually turned into something bigger. At school, Cleese did well in his studies, but it was comedy that really pulled him in. When he went to Cambridge University, he joined the Footlights Club, a student group that put on comedy shows. And that was a pretty huge choice. The Footlights stage was where he began writing and performing in a way that reached real audiences, not just classmates or friends. His height, serious face, and sharp timing set him apart from the crowd. Even when he said something silly, he looked like he meant it, and that contrast was gold. The Footlights' success opened even more doors for Cleese. He started getting work on radio and television. In the mid-1960s, he was hired for The Frost Report, a comedy show that mixed clever writing with current events. There he worked with other comedians who were also just starting out, including Graham Chapman. Cleese and Chapman became close partners, and together they created sketches that fused smart wordplay with pure nonsense. By 1969, Cleese had taken things further with Monty Python's Flying Circus. The show broke every rule of normal comedy. Sketches didn't always have punchlines, scenes jumped from one wild idea to the next, and nothing was off-limits. Cleese played roles that seemed serious on the surface but were completely ridiculous underneath, such as military officers shouting nonsense, judges making absurd rulings, or businessmen behaving like children. Viewers loved the chaos, and Monty Python quickly became a landmark in comedy. Even with that success, Cleese wanted more than quick sketches. He wanted to build a character that audiences could follow week after week. Someone who wasn't just funny for a few minutes, but could carry a whole story. He was ready for something new, but didn't yet know what it would be. He got his answer during his trip to Torquay in 1970, where he met the manager whose strange behavior would give him an idea that changed comedy history. From that awkward stay, Basil Fawlty was born. Building the Towers. When John Cleese set out to build Fawlty Towers, he wasn't doing it on his own. His wife at the time, Connie Booth, was right there with him. The two of them wrote every episode together, usually sitting for hours, arguing, laughing, and sometimes driving each other mad. Out of that storm came something brilliant. The seed of the show was simple. Cleese had met Donald Sinclair, and he thought, this man belongs on television. But turning one strange hotel owner into a whole series was another matter. That's where Booth's steady hand helped. She was sharp, funny, and willing to wrestle with Cleese's endless rewriting. Together, they took that idea and built the strange little world of a seaside hotel where everything that could go wrong did. The BBC almost killed it before it started, because the first scripts confused the executives. One even scribbled on the notes that it was a complete disaster and not worth filming. Cleese later joked about how close the show came to never seeing the light of day, but he and Booth refused to give up. They knew they had something special, even if nobody else could see it yet. When the cameras finally rolled, the mix of characters was explosive. Cleese threw himself into Basil, the uptight, bitter hotel owner who snapped at everyone but never got the respect he thought he deserved. Booth played Polly, the calm maid who often saved Basil from himself. There was also Prunella Scales as Sybil, the wife who ruled the marriage with cutting remarks, and Andrew Sachs as Manuel, the confused waiter who never seemed to get anything right. Put them all in one hotel. Add a stream of demanding guests, and chaos was guaranteed. The writing was brutal, and Cleese and Booth would take weeks just to finish one script. Every line was debated, and they polished every scene until it worked like clockwork. That's why the series only ever had 12 episodes. But those 12 were packed with more energy and precision than most shows manage in 10 seasons. Behind the scenes, though, things weren't smooth. Cleese and Booth's marriage was under strain. The long hours, the pressure, and their different personalities wore them down. By the time the second series was being filmed, they were divorced. Yet, they still worked side by side, finishing the scripts as if nothing had changed. Watching the show, you'd never guess the writers were no longer together. But even in their differences, they created magic. Why Fawlty Towers work. Plenty of sitcoms come and go, but Fawlty Towers stuck. And it wasn't because of flashy sets or big budgets. The show worked because every single part of it was built with care, timing, and a kind of madness that felt just real enough. The first reason was Basil himself, played by John Cleese. He made his character to be constantly on the edge, especially as he wanted respect, money, and order. But life kept refusing to give him any of it. Every episode showed him trying to control chaos while creating even more. Audiences laughed because they saw a little of Basil in themselves, and they recognized that feeling of wanting to hold it all together and failing in the most ridiculous ways. But Basil alone couldn't carry the show, though. Sybil, played by Prunella Scales, was just as important. She was sharp, quick with insults, and completely unshaken by her husband's tantrums. Without her, Basil's explosions would have been too much. But with her, the balance was perfect. Their marriage was comedy gold, with all the nagging, eye rolls, and the clipped phone calls. Everyone knew a couple like that, which made it sting and amuse at the same time. There was also Manuel, the Spanish waiter, who never ever understood what Basil wanted. His confusion added to the slapstick that worked beautifully with the sharp dialogue. And Connie Booth's Polly gave the show its only bit of sanity, which made the rest of the madness pop even more. Each character had a role, and none of them wasted a second on screen. Another reason why the show worked had to be the writing. Cleese and Booth didn't rush, but spent weeks making sure every misunderstanding, insult, and every pratfall landed exactly right. Episodes were built like domino runs, and one mistake led to another, until everything crashed down in the final scene. That rhythm kept people hooked, together with the fact that the show ended early, after just 12 episodes. The infamous episode, The Germans. Ask anyone to name a Fawlty Towers episode, and 9 times out of 10, they'll say The Germans. It's the one that burned itself into people's memories, not because it was safe or polite, but because it went right for the edge and stayed there. The story kicks off with Basil in hospital after a head injury. Sybil tells him to stay put and rest, but Basil, being Basil, he decides the hotel will collapse without him. So, wrapped in bandages and barely able to think straight, he marches back to the lobby determined to run things his way. That's when a group of German guests arrive. And from there, everything unravels. Basil, dazed and desperate to look in control, manages to offend them almost instantly. He tells himself, "Don't mention the war." But of course, that's all he ends up doing. Each time he opens his mouth, another ridiculous comment spills out. He tries to dig himself out, only to dig deeper. Then there's the scene that made history and stirred plenty of trouble. Basil, confused and stumbling, breaks into a mocking goose step across the dining room, complete with a Hitler salute. The German guests were horrified, and viewers watching at home in the 1970s were split. Some thought it was one of the funniest things they'd ever seen on television, but others thought Cleese had gone too far. But the thing is, the joke was never on the Germans. It was on Basil. He wasn't clever or sharp. He was an idiot who embarrassed himself in front of everyone. Cleese has said many times that the target was always small-minded people like Basil who couldn't let go of the past, which was what gave the scene its bite. So, basically, you weren't laughing at the victims of history, but at the absurdity of prejudice. The episode also gave the world one of the show's most famous lines, "Don't mention the war." It's still quoted today, even by people who've never seen Fawlty Towers. The beauty of it is in the contradiction. Basil repeats it like a warning, then instantly breaks his own rule. It's pure farce, watching a man crumble under pressure, unable to control his own mouth. Of course, The Germans has had a messy afterlife. In recent years, broadcasters have pulled it or slapped warnings on it. Some argue it doesn't belong in modern times. Others defend it as a sharp piece of satire that still hits the point. Being racism and prejudice look ridiculous when exposed. Cleese himself has always stood by it. For him, the whole point was to show how laughable ignorance is when it's dragged out into the open. Love it or hate it. The Germans is the episode that made Fawlty Towers impossible to forget. Fallout. Even though Cleese had explained the point of the joke at the time, over the years, the complaints never really stopped. Every time the show was repeated, someone would bring it up. In the 90s, when attitudes to comedy were changing, broadcasters started asking if it was still okay to show the episode. And by the 2000s, it became one of those hot-button moments where people argued about it at dinner tables and in newspaper columns. But things came to a head in 2020 when a streaming platform briefly pulled the episode, saying it contained racial slurs and outdated references. The move caused a storm because some agreed, saying comedy should evolve with the times, and others accused the platform of censorship, arguing that you couldn't erase history or blunt satire just because it made people uncomfortable. Cleese, of course, hit back. He said people were missing the point. The insults in the show, he argued, were meant to expose Basil's ignorance, not celebrate it. By removing the episode, you were punishing the very satire that mocked prejudice in the first place. That debate still circles around the episode to this day. Comedy on trial. Can satire survive? Every time the Germans gets dragged back into debate, one of the questions that hangs in the air is, can satire survive in today's world? What was once seen as biting comedy is now treated by some as offensive, even dangerous. And that tension is less about Fawlty Towers and more about comedy as a whole. The fact is, satire has always lived on the edge. The whole point of it is to push buttons, poke fun at the powerful, and to show how foolish people can be. That's what John Cleese was doing with Basil Fawlty. His plan was not to make Basil a figure to be admired, but to make him the target. The laughter came from watching him embarrass himself and not from agreeing with him. But in a time when audiences are quicker to raise complaints, the line between laughing at ignorance and spreading ignorance has blurred. In the past, comedians had more freedom to shock. Shows like Monty Python, Yes Minister, or Spitting Image thrived because they didn't play safe. They trusted viewers to understand the difference between satire and endorsement. Today, comedians often find themselves walking into a storm of online backlash the moment they take a risk. The debate isn't going away, too. On one side, you have people saying comedy must adapt, drop the old jokes, and reflect modern sensitivities. On the other, you've got defenders like Cleese, who argue that satire is being strangled by caution, and that without sharp edges, comedy loses its teeth. So, can satire survive? The truth is, it already has, but it's changing. Comedians today find new ways to challenge authority, expose hypocrisy, and make audiences think while still laughing. The battleground has changed, but the fight is the same. Who decides what's fair game and who gets to draw the line? The cast beyond the chaos. John Cleese usually takes the spotlight when people talk about Fawlty Towers, but the fact is, the show worked because of its whole cast, because each one brought something unforgettable to the chaos of the hotel. And once the doors of Fawlty Towers closed, their lives took very different turns. Prunella Scales, who played Sybil, was the sharp-tongued counterweight to Basil. Her laugh cut through every scene, and her timing was flawless. After the show, she kept building her career in theater and TV, proving she was much more than Basil's wife. Later in life, Scales became known for speaking openly about living with memory loss, showing the same bravery off-screen that made her so brilliant on-screen. Andrew Sachs, forever remembered as Manuel, the bumbling waiter from Barcelona, gave the show its heart. He was a pretty good comic relief. But more than that, his innocence made Basil's cruelty even funnier. After Fawlty Towers, Sachs had steady work in radio and television, but he never escaped Manuel's shadow. He later admitted it was both a blessing and a burden. Still, fans adored him, and his catchphrase, "I know nothing," became part of TV history. There was also Connie Booth, who played Polly, the level-headed waitress. Her calm wit grounded the madness around her. Yet, after the second series, Booth stepped away from acting. She chose a different path and retrained as a psychotherapist. It was sort of a surprise for some people, but the truth is, it kind of fit her nature. What makes the cast so special is how perfectly they worked together. None of the jokes would have landed the same way if even one piece of the puzzle was missing. Their chemistry made the hotel feel real, even when everything happening inside it was completely absurd. The reboot question. For years, Fawlty Towers has been held up as one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. Even though it ran for just 12 episodes, it managed to become bigger than shows that went on for decades. So whenever the idea of a reboot or revival pops up, the reaction is mixed. On one hand, the demand is obvious. Fans wonder what Basil and Sybil would look like in today's world. Would Basil be raging at online reviews instead of fussy hotel guests? Would Manuel still be trying to survive in the chaos of Basil's tantrums? The thought of seeing John Cleese back in that lobby has a certain pull, no matter how risky it sounds. But the problem is, reboots almost never live up to the original. Fawlty Towers worked because it was lightning in a bottle, as the timing, cast, and writing all came together at just the right moment. Trying to recreate that decades later feels dangerous. Even Cleese himself has often pushed back against the idea, saying the show belongs to its time. His argument is that stretching it out would water down the brilliance that came from keeping it short. But what do you think? Should Fawlty Towers stay frozen in time as a perfect classic, or is the world finally ready to risk a reboot? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.